Hey ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of VGU Talks. We have a nice conversation about something in the world of games. I'm Don the Expert Coles from VideoGamesUncovered.com, and today we're talking about Let It Die. If you haven't seen Let It Die, or you haven't even heard about it, well, it's the new game being made by the legendary Suda51. And if you know me, I'm a huge fan of Suda51 games. They are on the other side of outrageous, and okay, I can understand why some people aren't fan of Suda51 titles, because they are quite niche in their own regard, but if Suda51 can do one thing, it's bring to light new worlds or new concepts in a completely different way that are either so crazy or so outrageous that you can't help but get hyped for it. And that's exactly what I'm feeling for Let It Die. So of course we didn't actually see much of Let It Die at E3, just very tiny snippets of gameplay in the trailer that was shown off, showing more live action rather than actual in-game stuff, which was an interesting approach. But, Suda51 has came out in detail as to how the game is actually going to work, and how the whole gameplay and feel of it is going to work out. So in this video, I am going to be talking about Let It Die, going over what Suda51 is bringing to the table, and basically saying why I am so hyped for Let It Die. So let's let it die, shall we? First things first, it's an arena brawler. So that's actually pretty cool. So it's just a massive survival, big brawl out game, which should look pretty darn epic straight from that. However, kind of like how Dark Souls work where you're able to invade other people's worlds, Suda51 has a similar mechanic in Let It Die. However, it doesn't work like a Souls game. You know, in a Souls game you have to obviously have the right stone, put your sign down, someone has to go up to your sign, accept that they want you in their world, and then you have to travel to their world, and then you can help them out, but only for a limited amount of time. For this, it's a completely different way. As soon as you make your character is a part of that world. When your character dies, your character stays in that world, but appears in other people's games. Basically meaning that you become a quote-unquote ghost in the machine, which is pretty friggin' epic. So you can imagine, you can either start out and get beat up really early on, so that you have the ghost of the weak version of you running around, or later on, after you get some really badass equipment, you've leveled up more, and you feel like an absolute badass, but you lose in an epic confrontation. The ghost of your character stays there and lingers on, haunting other people's games. Now that is pretty friggin' cool, and I'm looking forward to how deep this can get. One interesting tidbit as well about this game is that it's not as story driven as what Suda51 titles have normally been. And also that the skateboarding Grim Reaper in the game's logo actually does play a pretty big role in the plot, which is awesome. I mean, Death going around the place on a skateboard, that's pretty cool. What's going to be next? Death with an iPad? Oh wait, Sims 4's done that. Whoa, that's done at least. So let's have a look at what Suda51 details about the start of the game. Players won't have a giant inventory in their pockets, or even pockets at all in some cases. Instead, you spawn as an avatar in their skivvies and need to acquire weapons and clothing on the spot. Suda calls Let It Die a survival action game, and he notes that this limited inventory lends the game a more vulnerable feeling than we usually get in the genre. It's not like a typical RPG, he says, where you go into a menu to select your weapons. Now that sounds like a pretty interesting idea. The whole matter of, you don't even have pockets or an endless deep hole of which you can have a whole arsenal of weaponry from. What you see is what you get. You see a piece of clothing on the ground, you can pick it up and you wear it. You see a machete, you pick up that machete and that machete is yours. But if you pick up a very bigger weapon that requires two hands instead of one, you may just have to put that machete to one side and carry around this massive blade. Now that sounds like a great idea, and it also implements an interesting feel as to different loadouts and also play styles coming into play, which is pretty freaking sick. And so, you know what I said earlier about when you die in the world, you're left as a ghost in someone else's world that they actually have to defeat? Well, Suda has also came out saying where the inspiration came from for that mechanic of the game, saying that the core concept was how do we get the players to repeat play without getting bored. We thought if we could put other players' data into it, they'd have different characteristics each time you play. Which is extremely interesting because you can pretty much start one game, have barely nothing, and then work your way up to everything. Or you can respawn again, everything's given to you on a silver platter, but you die incredibly early and incredibly weak. It's a nice balance, and I'm actually looking forward as to how much replay value this is truly going to give you. Because it has to make you feel as if every time you play the game, there's going to be something different and something new to it every time you respawn, to the extent where you never know who or what you're going to come against next. So it's a completely dynamic and changing world that you're fighting in, which is pretty friggin' great. Now, of course, recently there's been that whole debacle involving Ubisoft about female characters in video games, and Suda was actually approached in this interview and was asked, are there female characters in Let It Die? Sadly, Suda wasn't allowed to actually talk about it in the interview because the PR representatives weren't allowed to let him specify at the time, which was fine. But I did like how the interview went on, where the interviewer came out saying, would you like to have female characters? And Suda did generally come out saying, yes I would. So it would be great if we did have female characters in this game, not just for the sake of skivvies, because I know there are gamers out there that have played the Suda 51 games of the past. Heck, Lollipop Chainsaw, do I dare bring it up? And of course, in that game, you had a very big emphasis on scantily clad women. Whether that's going to be portrayed in Let It Die, or these women are going to be way more dirtier, grittier, way more tougher, more like a more masculine female than a very feminine looking female, that's yet to be discussed. Heck, Suda has only said, I would like females to be in the game, so it's a 50-50 confirmation. But it would be great regardless, because of course, in a game where you just jump in as a random avatar, surely it would be great if you could choose whether that random avatar is of course male or female. At the end of the day, guys, Let It Die is looking to be a very interesting game from Suda51. Definitely different from the other titles he has made in the past. It'll be interesting to see how well this does. I'm very interested indeed about some of the main mechanics of the game and the replay value of whenever you die, your ghost lingers on and haunts other people in other people's games, how death plays a role on his snazzy little skateboard. All that jazz surely to be explained later on in the coming months before its release, and I am just looking forward to it. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of that. But I'm quite curious, what are you looking forward to in Let It Die? Or are you just not looking forward to it at all? And do you think the Suda51's development team over at Grasshopper should, well, ironically, let it die? Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below, and I will see you next time for another edition of VGU Talks.